It is January 23rd, 2025. I'm with Dr. Barbara Oliver Korner. Dr. Korner, thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed through the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at the University of Florida. My name is Paul Ortiz. I was former director of the program. I'm now professor of labor history at Cornell, but I'm just really glad to be, anytime I get back to Florida, I'm going to do it, although the weather there isn't much warmer today than it is in New York. Well, anyway, let's go ahead and get started, because I know you're always up to something new, so I don't want to take too much of your time. But and I mentioned Lucinda gave us some questions and as well, but I wanted to see if we can kind of go back a bit earlier. And if you wouldn't mind sharing with us a sense of how you ended up in the arts, what, kind of early childhood experiences, maybe education, parents, family influence, et cetera, like why the arts?
Well, I think for me, I was raised in a family that, well, music was really important and played a big role in our life. And I also was part of a church organization, a fairly large church. I grew up in Kansas City. I still consider Kansas City home. And in that church, my father was very, very active in the church music program. And I started singing at a very young age, and also started we did performances there as well. And as a child, I was very active. And then also in my school, I was, when I was going to school, it was still, you went through our classes went through the 8th grade from grade school. And so for class plays that the older students were doing, if they needed a child, I typically was there. And then I started doing some television work as a grade schooler, again, because we knew some people who did some work, local programs at the local television station in Kansas City. And I did some work on television, and just so very early on was involved in acting and singing. And it just was kind of what I did all through school, and planned on I can't remember a time when I wasn't planning on being in acting and singing, and pursued that really throughout my college career. And I wrote in my high school, where you write things as a senior, had a little memory book. And I went back and looked at that not too long ago, and it said, what will you be doing in 5 years? And I said, I'll be teaching speech and drama at a university, which was crazy, but I was as a graduate assistant.
Okay.
So, yeah, so that's, it kind of was just there as a part of my life, and my parents encouraged it. And so that's just what I did. And then it was interesting because I got involved in administration also early on. And I have a fun story about that too. When we get to my career, if you want to keep that in.
Oh, yes, most definitely. We want to get to the story, and the more fun we can have, the better. I wonder if as you were moving into, the stage, theater, music, were there performers, Barbara, that you remember as a child or a young girl growing up that had a big impact, or, performances or theater?
Well, this is going to be an odd. This is going to be an odd my initial response. That's going to be an odd one for you. But we had, in Kansas City, we had the Starlight Theater, and that it was an outdoor theater in the summertime that brought in professional actors. And as a child, for some reason, I was enamored of Robert, I believe the actor's name was Robert Horton, who played on Wagon Train. And I could remember the first performances I just begged my parents to go take me to, was because he was performing in one of the musicals in the Starlight Theater. And for some reason, I remember him as I think what I remembered him as a child. I just found him he was so able to communicate somehow through the camera, and and as a person on stage, to even me as a young child, somehow there was something about him that was so real and so genuine that spoke to me even when I was a very little child. So that's an odd answer for that, but that is, I think, one answer. I think the other, well, I had a fun time seeing some, I'm pulling a name out right now. It's probably going to be hard, but I saw a lot of professional performers in the Kansas City area for different things, particularly at Starlight Theater. A lot of performers in that musical theater that were really, I really enjoyed watching. I think also movies were really important to me. Katharine Hepburn was one of my favorite actors when I was younger. And I enjoyed watching many, many old movies. We had the CBS station in Kansas City ran on Saturday nights after the 10 o'clock news. They ran old classic movies, and I was able to stay up late and watch those. And I probably watched 3 or 4 hours worth of classic movies on then. And Katharine Hepburn was one of my favorites. Later, Meryl Streep, just, you know, and I got to see. I remember, now this is when I was older, but I spent a summer in London, and when I was actually working on my master's performance project, and I got to watch some great theater there. Maggie Smith on stage, directed by John Gielgud. Amazing performances. I saw Rex Harrison and Julie Harris in plays there. And Linda Lavin, who just recently passed away, I saw her on Broadway many years ago. And again, all people who could just reach through and reach the audience. You know, I've always told people there's a difference when you see somebody on stage, you know immediately the difference between somebody who's worth a $25 seat and somebody who's worth a $2,500 seat. I mean, you just and so I think seeing some of those as I was growing up, and I was fortunate in Kansas City, and then to be able to start going to New York and even in London. And so that's not, I don't know that you got one big one there, but.
Oh yeah, that's an all-star group. Any singers that particularly you enjoyed as maybe as a girl and a teenager?
Boy. That's interesting. Well, I think one early on, Jesse Norman, is one. I think I first heard Jesse Norman when I was in high school, and she was, you know, she was fabulous. I'm trying to think of, you know, I'm thinking of who I saw live.
Right.
Boy, that's a tough one for me right now, to think
Well,
about.
you know, you also were mentioning the Starlight Theater. I've heard about that. Is that still around?
You know, I think now I don't, you know, it's interesting that you asked. The last time I was at the Starlight, it was in the wintertime, and it was when they had transferred some of the buildings into this immersive. It was about 4 years ago, I think. And they had transferred, you know, it was one of these immersive Van Gogh shows that they had there.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So we were in some of the administrative buildings doing that. I think, I don't know. I think now they do more, if there is stuff going on there, I think they do more like concert type of things. And they do 1 or 2 big shows, but they don't do the series of shows that they did.
Right.
I was in high school. They had 3 or 4 of us in the Kansas City area high schools who were on the board. And, you know, so I used to go to them performances consistently all the time. But
back then it had a stage, and so it was known for theatrical performances also, or
the Starlight Theater.
The Starlight, yeah.
Oh yeah, yes, they had a big. It's an outdoor theater.
Okay. Oh, okay.
I mean, it was a full stage, and I can't remember how many it held, but it was outdoors, and there was no covering. And I more than once More than once I was there when it started raining. And in fact, one time I was there with a friend in college and we had gone to it and we weren't sure we were going to get home because when we got to the lot where our car was, it was sunk and the car was kind of full of water. And this was in the day before cell phones. So finally we opened the doors and the water went out and we managed to get the car started. We got out, but you could get drenched sometimes at Starlight Theater because it was not, you know, of course they call the performances off and if there was a rain thing, but no, it was outside. And I mean, there were, it was an outdoor amphitheater. I mean, the seating, they seated several thousand people there. I mean, you know, I say several thousand. I mean, it was probably, I should have said several hundred, but it was probably, I would say 1,500, maybe 2,000 seats. It was a big outdoor space and very professionally lit and everything. Great scenery and costumes.
Okay.
It was a professional, really.
Yeah, I've heard about it. It'd be an iconic performance space, but I never really knew too much about it.
I need to find out if it's what the story is. I haven't stayed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know, and also you mentioned matriculating to college and, you know, your aspirations. Was college an expectation that your parents had for you, or was it something that you just kind of fell into, or?
Well, I'm a first generation college student. So they aspired to that for me. They wanted me to go to college. I had a high school project, maybe my sophomore, junior year. And it was I think it was geography class. And our project was to write about something, you know, to pick an area and, do research on it and write a little story about it. And I started mine by saying that I picked Nova Scotia and I created my own little story saying that as present for my graduation from college, my parents were giving me a trip to Nova Scotia. And my mother used to read my papers and stuff before I would turn them in. And she was looking at, and I will never forget, she just smiled and said, if you go to college, I will do all I can to give you a trip anywhere you want to go. And I remember that, you know, that it was important for them. They wanted me to go to college. Yeah.
Well, excellent. And then as a first generation student, how did you ultimately make your decision? I mean, there are a lot of colleges, a lot of places you could go, a lot of different majors. I mean, can you kind of walk us through that process back then?
Again, I was raised in a very strict church background there. And so Bob Jones University was a university that I'd heard a lot about, and that was kind of the plan where I would go. And it also happened that the public high school I went to in Kansas City was one of the top. Those were a lot of competitive forensics in theater in that time. And we were known for having a fabulous theater program. And our theater professor happened to be a Bob Jones graduate. And she would never proselytize for students to go there, but because because of my church background, she was eager for me to go there. And I actually turned down a full ride scholarship to the Kansas City Conservatory, which was great. The UMKC theater department was great. And I had a full ride there in theater. But she kind of turned it down for me, to be honest. And I wanted to go away. And then there was my senior year, there was kind of a series of disasters in my life. My parents got divorced unexpectedly. My mother almost died. And then I was in a very bad car accident and had a massive brain concussion. So I wound up then going, again, I still got a scholarship, but I went to Southeast Missouri State, which is now just Missouri State University in Springfield, Missouri. I'm sorry, it was Southwest Missouri State. It's just now Missouri State University in Springfield, Missouri, on a theater scholarship. And I was there for a year. And then I did transfer to Bob Jones and I went there. And unfortunately, I think many people know the kind of the stories about Bob Jones and its fundamentalism and this, but what they don't know is that it had an amazing arts program because Bob Jones Jr. was a Shakespeare aficionado and played Shakespeare all over the country. I've never performed on a stage in a college like I did there. It was a fantastic stage, tremendous art gallery there, collection. At that time, I don't know if it's still the case, but they at one point in time had the largest collection of religious art in the States. And Rembrandt's and Botticelli's were there, and the music programs were amazing. Again, I worked with people like Eileen Farrell were there to do opera. Morley Meredith, I worked with Morley Meredith as a student on stage. I worked with some tremendous names in opera. As a student, I worked there with them. I'm trying to think of so many of these names have left me now, but we had a woman who played Lucia de Lammermoor, and I was able to understudy for that role. And so just some really spectacular, they always brought people in, professional opera singers in to do the opera. And so it was a fabulous experience, and I grew well beyond it. I did, when I left there, finally, I don't have the letter anymore, but at one point I got a letter saying, I'm such a reprobate, I'm no longer welcome on campus at any time for any purpose.
Now, why did you receive that?
Well, actually, when I left there, one year I spent working, there was a group of us who were in theater and music together, and we just couldn't see ourselves continuing to stay there. And so we started a performance team, and it actually was a theological difference. We were performing in a church that they didn't agree with the theological stance, and so that's why they. So I've had a very different journey since then, Paul.
Right. Well, it's an amazing journey. Well, and it's interesting because we have majors. We decide. I'm a first-gen college student too, and so you pick a major. You decide to major in that. In my situation, it was always about the outcome, though. The job. What were you going to do with the degree? So when did it begin to occur to you that you could make this major and your love and passion for theater, arts, and performance into a career, and not just, oh, this is a really cool thing to do?
Well, I think first of all, I was going to get and I did get enough education courses to do certification as a teacher, because I had enough sense to do that.
Yeah.
But, it's an interesting thing because I never sort of questioned that. I mean, first of all, I planned on staying in a university setting. I didn't plan on becoming a professional actor. I think I could have done that if I wanted to, but that's not really what I wanted to do. And I could have done that if I had gone to schools that would have channeled me into that. Okay. But that's not really what I intended to stay in a university setting. And I really thought I would probably stay in a church-related setting. That was kind of where that's kind of what I was raised in. That's what I was sort of interested in doing that. And so what became more of a surprise was where I wound up in my career in public research universities. Because all the way through my doctorate, I got the doctorate I did, which was an interdisciplinary PhD, because I imagined I would be at a private liberal arts institution, and I would need to be better versed in all of the arts and able to teach all of the arts and not just theater. But because of the experience I had at Bob Jones, where it was a church-related school, but had such a wonderful arts program, I thought, well, you can have great arts anywhere. And so I thought, it would be my mission sort of to do that. But then as I was finishing my PhD, I fell in love with somebody who was about being at research universities. And so we spent our lives at research universities, and doors opened there in just the right way. And I had some great experiences there that, you don't always understand at the time, but they always tend to add up to something more wonderful than you could have imagined.
Yeah. Well, you've had a really tremendous career, Barbara, looking, over your CV and the articles you've written and, your academic, not only teaching and research, but, and I think really kind of the focus for this series of interviews, your administrative acumen. And could you talk about, and again, this is not a typical journey. Very few academics imagine going into administration. Could you maybe talk about your early years, kind of as a younger career, academic first, and then maybe give us a sense of how you begin the transition into more of a leadership kind of role?
Well, I think one of the things that really happened for me, because right as I was finishing my PhD, that's right on the heels of when I wound up getting married, and we moved to the University of Missouri, and I got it was not a tenure track position that I was on at that point. But I was teaching and enjoying it and working in theater and acting with the students and teaching. And then through an odd sort of set of circumstances, I wound up, well, let me go back. I actually, it was before I was finished with my PhD. And when I realized we were going to stay at that time at Ohio University, and there wasn't going to be again, I had a part-time, I was adjuncting in the theater department, and I was continuing to do my own scholarship work. But I worked with a general education program there. I started as an advisor. And boy, did I love that work. I loved working with the students. I loved helping them think about what they were going to do differently. And because my own bent has always been to see a bigger picture and to see how you connect the dots and how you bring disciplines together. Because I've always said, and that's what I said, when we would at Penn State, when we worked with engineering, I'd say, if you guys will let the artists at the table, if the scientists will let the artists at the table, the artists can explode the questions for you. They're just not going to try to find an answer to the question. They're going to explode the questions for you and help you see a whole different way. And I think that's kind of how I've been. And so I started out working, and again, I had great mentors. I had really tremendous mentors in the field. And a man who just passed away recently was my mentor at Ohio University. And I just happened to have coffee with him a year ago, and he passed away unexpectedly. I'm so glad I had a chance to have coffee with him. But he taught me so much about how working with different faculty areas, and again, thinking about more broadly about our educational experience in a research university. Then when we moved to the University of Missouri, again, I was teaching in speech and theater and performance work there. And then I got in the, I worked for the first woman, Barbara Euling, who broke through the glass ceiling. She was one of the early women to break through the glass ceiling in higher education, leading a major research university. And she hired me as her chief of staff. And again, it was looking for a job at that point. I mean, it was, I want to say it wasn't looking for a job, but it was more interesting to me than continuing to do the adjunct work. And there, but again, I kept, as you can see from my vita, I kept active with what my roots were. And so I stayed tied to the theater program there, but I was working as chief of staff to her, and what I learned there, working about fundraising, about working with different areas in the discipline, about seeing a woman under fire, and what it was, how you find that right balance to, that if you're too strong, you're going to be labeled, dragon lady, and and so finding that happy medium. It was also a time, and that University of Missouri and in the chancellor's office is where I first met Don McLaughlin, and he was then the director of the School of Music there, and Barbara Euling was more open to the arts and was was supportive of the arts. And so from that position, I was working with Dawn to look at the possibility of creating a school of fine arts there. The primary purpose of which was to give us a little clout to build a new building. We really did need a new building there. And so, so I was working on that with Dawn from the chancellor's office. And then Barbara left, and I served a couple of years during an interim time because I knew if I just walked away, it would be really difficult in the office. But I still was working with Dawn closely and my theater colleagues. And so then after I felt comfortable leaving the chancellor's office, I went over to be assistant director with Dawn. And again, you know, I learned a lot from Barbara and from being in that situation in the corporate headquarters. And then I back in my field and I thought, you know, this is where I want to stay. This is really where I want to stay. And then as that, our ideas that we had, it looked with Dawn and I, again, that's kind of, Dawn gave me some experience in looking at the possibilities of building, and we went to visit some architects in Springfield. And of course, I had an architectural history as part of my degree. So I, you know, had some interest in all of this. And then when I think we both realized that wasn't going to happen, the opportunity opened for him to be a dean here at Florida. And at the same time, I left to become the dean at Seattle Pacific, again, private church-related school. So I thought, oh, I'm back home, you know. So that's kind of how all that unfolded.
Wow. Yeah, it's quite an odyssey. You know, I was looking at, in preparing for the interview today, I was looking at some of the really amazing statements that you made, the wonderful writing for Muse, which was the college, the publication at the University of Florida, out of the College of Fine Arts then. And it was just really inspiring to read your writing, how you place the arts really at the center of everything. And it gets back to a statement you made earlier, how you're at a table, assuming, you know, you're talking to, you know, a campus-wide audience of leaders, and you're saying that, you know, an arts person can really explode, can really like bring a whole new level of thinking to these problems that are, you know, common in higher education. Now, as a humanities scholar, that's exciting to me also, because oftentimes humanities is seen as an afterthought, right? And so how did you develop the ability to convince everyone that arts is really at the center of the university, of the research university in particular, where people will go, you know, they'll go to performance, they'll say, you know, obviously, you know, I want my children to be raised with culture and music and literature, et cetera, et cetera. But by the time they get to the university, by gosh, they're going to be engineering majors. So how you're able to make arts the center?
Well, I think, first of all, let me be quick to say, some people were convinced by that. There are many who never were. So,
Okay.
let's be honest.
Yeah.
I think, well, first of all, I do think my background in understanding different ones of the arts, so I'm not just speaking from as a theater professor or from that perspective, although I will tell you this, this is the story. When Barbara Euling hired me to be the chief of staff, and of course she was, until she hired me, she was the only woman at the table, and then she hired me, and I go into the first staff meeting. Okay, it's senior staff. All these vice chancellors are sitting around, and they're all men. And one of them was really a flippant guy. I mean, he had quite a reputation. And so she introduces me and everything and tells him about, you know, my background. So he sits there for a minute and he says, I'd like to know how an acting background prepares you for higher education, or for you know, to be a leader in higher education. And I said, I waited about 2 beats. And I said, you know what? I can't imagine much better preparation for it. You know, and there was kind of silence, and then everybody broke up, and from that point,
Right.
trouble. Although later, Barbara Euling hired a provost who is still a good friend of mine. She wound up as the president of SUNY Binghamton, but she was the provost at University of Missouri, and she was a sociologist with a specialty in what was then called deviant behavior. And so I said, that's better. That's even a better preparation
Right.
for higher ed administration. So I think part of it is you know, being comfortable in your own shoes and believing in what we do, and then, but also respecting enough what other people do and learning enough about it to talk on the same level. And sort of never, the other thing we can do in the arts is we can become victims. Oh, we don't have the resources. We don't have this. We don't have that. We don't get paid as much. Well, you don't. You never will. You know? But what can we do instead? You know? And that's one thing I learned from Don McLaughlin at the University of Florida, where the resources in the arts were not that great, where the Florida State was the normal school. So it was the women's campus, and the arts tend to thrive where the women are. That just tended to be part of it. It's not so much anymore, but it tended to be part of it for many years. And I think that transition really happened during a strong transition happened during Don's administration, where the arts really moved up in the perspective at UF. And that's important to do. And there are things you can do. And again, you know what we do, we create worlds out of nothing. And so, and I'm not saying I'm not saying we live there, and I'm not saying we be content with that, and I'm not saying we say that's okay, but we got to do it. You just got to get in and get started and figure out what you can do with what you've got. And then you begin to show them, and you get these aha moments. We celebrated the 50th anniversary of the College of Arts and Architecture when I was at Penn State, and it came right on the heels of the Sandusky scandal. Okay, when that just kind of blew everybody up. All right. And we lost the icon of Joe Paterno, and you thought the sky was falling, right?
Yeah. We
made such a wonderful celebration there out of that. And I had letters from alumni, we got reviewed in Broadway World because we did this fantastic production of Bernstein's Mass. 400 people on stage. We had people in the community. We had students. We had professional people. And it was like, they got it. It was suddenly so healing for that community to do that.
Yeah.
Wow. So you find ways, and you accept the other thing, I think you have to keep building relationships. When I was here, we started the foundation of a really good relationship with the College of Engineering. And we laid that foundation. We started that partly with the Digital Worlds Institute, but we found this other kind of exciting lighting project that we took. Now the lighting project failed. We raised some money, but we didn't raise enough, and I left and it didn't continue, and that's okay. We planted enough seeds so that Lucinda was really able to build on those seeds and do some really good things in engineering, connecting the engineering and the arts. And that's the other thing, I think. You realize that, again, Don built, and people before him did that. You always stand on the shoulders of whoever went before you. And you respect that. You learn to respect people, you learn to respect what they do, and you demonstrate the ways in which and that's what you have to do in a public research university. You have to keep finding ways to demonstrate the way the arts can make a difference.
Barbara, you mentioned Don, and we have had the opportunity to talk with him as well as with Lucinda and the many challenges they faced. As an arts leader and intellectual, what do you learn from Don that was instrumental for you as a leader in arts and higher education?
Well, part of it was what I just alluded to. Don was always so positive and so, and I don't, optimistic is maybe too frivolous a word, but Don was always a person who could see the possibilities in spite of the difficulties. And there's a saying, making a silk purse out of a sow's ear. And although, again, you want to be careful in the arts and you don't always take the leftovers. Okay. And you have to keep positioning yourself so you're not doing that. But I think I learned from Don, it's unlikely in the arts, you're in a public research university, that you're ever going to have all the support you want or need. But that should not stop you from continuing to do all you can. And you build relationships and build respect with your colleagues and the senior officers. And then you can get more done. And in those relationships, people respect you, they respect what you do, you build advocates, you build collaborators. And so I think I learned that from him. I also learned from him, you do not have to be jealous or hesitant to surround yourself with people who will dare to say no to you and challenge you and give people their heads. Don gave me opportunities that I would never have had without him opening doors for me. And he gave me opportunities that some people would not give subordinates. That they would be concerned the subordinate would show them up or this or that. So he taught me, surround yourself with good people and give them their head. I will say being a dean is like casting a play. When you're directing a play, the key job of the director is to cast the thing well and get the heck out of the way. And Don was like that. And Don also has good ideas. And he was not afraid to dream, to see the future, and know that some things you're going to, they're going to go and they're going to fly and they're going to work. Some things are not. And it's not, and I want to be careful here because it's not, some people use the image of throw it on a wall and see what sticks. That wasn't what it was. It was like, what's important? And how do we put the pieces in place to make it happen? How do we have a good idea and how do we make this idea walk down the street? And I watched Don do that. That doesn't mean that idea is always going to work and always be successful, but it will eventually happen. One of the first things when I was interim dean here, the music building, I mean, who ever thought of building an open air music building in Florida? But it was clear we needed a new music building. And of course, the Steinbrenner building, the idea of a building, the band building is great. But the whole, it's like, okay, that's fine. But, we really need it. So one of my first appointments was to meet 2 or 3 people from physical plant and go over and really tour the music building thoroughly and hear all the issues and what we do. And I remember standing there, and I don't remember who the person was, but I listened to all this and I looked at the person from physical plant, the head person from physical plant. And I said, you know what? You, me, midnight dynamite. I see no other solution. It's like, and that was 20 years ago. And now they're getting a new building. Okay. Yeah. It took 20 years, but the stimulus came. The groundwork was laid, and it's finally happened. Would it have been nice if it would have happened sooner? Of course it would, but But the point is and you have to work as much as you can to leverage things. And part of even having the discussion about it at that point was leveraged because of the Steinbrenner gift.
Yeah.
You didn't know you're going to have fun editing this. I just go all over the map.
Oh, we're not gonna have to edit anything really. This is really, and Barbara, apropos of that, so this gets to a few of the questions that Lucinda would like us to pose. And one of them has to do with if you can identify, and again, this really fits in well with what you've just been sharing. If you can identify any trends or attitude changes that occurred towards the arts within UF over time.
So one of the things I have this kind of vague recollection of is when during my years as associate dean, the university engaged in a strategic planning process. And they came out with, it was sort of like, here were the core things, the core pieces of that, I think, the core colleges, if you will. And of course, the arts were not there. The arts were not part of it. And I remember we worked really hard, Don and I really worked hard together. And I think part of what I brought that was a help to Don is I have some skills in writing. And so we really articulated a pretty strong case for the arts at that point. Now, again, it was important for us to take that strategic planning process and do something with it. And I think we did. So I think that was a key piece in helping people realize it. I think the development of the interdisciplinary centers that Dawn did, I think began to put that more front and center in many ways. The other thing, and again, this is one of those small things, but I remember one of the things I did do as an interim dean, which I think was helpful for the position of the arts, and this seems an odd thing, but I remember it was right at that time, if the Steinbrenner building had come, the football team was really getting strong, right? I mean, it's 2006 is when they won the national championship, beat Ohio State in both football and baseball, or excuse me, basketball. And it clearly, the athletic department came and talked about a need for the band. The band, there was a sense that the band needed to be elevated a bit, and so we worked together with music to hire, and I hired Jay Watkins from the University of Texas, Austin during that time to be the band director. And it was interesting to me to see that timeline, because suddenly part of the timeline, after that time was how the blue band going to all these things. But that seems like, it's like, well, that's an athletic thing, but it changes the perception.
Yeah.
When you raise the bar, the bar was being raised athletically. The bar was being raised by the building that the blue band was getting. So the Gator band was getting. I probably slipped and said the blue band there a couple of times, but the Gator band was getting. And so it's like, okay, can we raise the bars at appropriate? Yeah, it is. Let's raise the bar for that band. And so then the Gator marching band, then, the bars raised a little bit for that. And then that helps the perception. And people can argue, well, it didn't raise it for opera. Well, it's okay. It raised it. It's a music perception, and it adds to it. So it's like helping. The flip side of that, Paul, is helping faculty understand that this is a cumulative thing. The perception is a cumulative thing. I think being able to have Tony Offerly in music work more closely with Tony Mata in musical theater instead of these two worlds being apart. Those are things that it raises the bar internally on the performance level, and then it raises the perception externally.
Yeah.
I think many of those, they may seem small in and of themselves, but I think those are things that the leadership, whether it's been at the dean's level, whether it's been the deans working with the school levels, bit by bit, all of those things have raised the bar, and they get the attention of the administration. You know.
Yeah.
You get money for a building, it gets the attention of the senior administration. The other thing that I think has been helpful, I think, although this actually kind of transpired after I left, but I think that Provost Glover and Dr. Fox, I think those have been stronger supporters and proponents of the arts. And I think they got the arts and the importance of the arts in a way. So that's been helpful.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, those are things that I think have added to it.
Yeah. Well, again, Barbara, apropos of Lucinda, another question that you wanted us to address, and you're already addressing this. Did the college develop new collaborative partners? You've named some of those, but I wonder if you wouldn't mind going a little deeper into kind of the important collaborative partners. It could be a unit, it could be a person outside of the college that was helpful.
Well, I think that the Digital Worlds Institute, the creation of that, although boy, let me tell you, that was not fun. That was not fun. And but it was important work. It was important work. And to the point that we built relationships enough with engineering that they actually approached, this is when I was still associate dean, they actually approached me about being on an IGERT grant with them. And I was like, okay. But so I would say, and I will apologize, Paul, because I think I'm just at that stage where names, there's too much up here. I have too much data anymore and not enough chip space. But I think the work we were able, and I think Pramod Kaganakar as Dean of Engineering, you know, he was really open to building some of those relationships. And so I think it was pulling teeth because it involved curriculum to create a degree in the Digital Worlds Institute. I think if we had not gotten to the degree creation, it might have been a little bit different. Boy, as you know, as a faculty member, you start mucking around with curriculum, and especially you start trying to come up with interdisciplinary curriculum, and it's really hard. But I think we got places with that, and that hard work paid off, because I think then that after that, Lucinda was really able to build on those relationships, and especially with Cammie. When Cammie Abernathy became the Dean of Engineering, I think they really were able to do much more in the engineering thing. And I think also, continuing to well, so those I think were the other thing that I think was really important. So that the Center for Arts, Healthcare and Research, CHRE, I forgot exactly what that acronym, and I think it's evolved since then, Arts and Medicine or something, but anyway, that was embryonic when I was here. And that became, that's nationally known, because as the arts and medicine whole trend has continued, and it's quite a thing now, you know, for arts to be those arts and medicine programs, but Florida was on the ground floor of that. And that understanding of all of that, and supporting of Jill Sonke, you know, and it was really fun for me to be at a national conference, and here was Jill, you know, and representing all of that, and so it was great. And in fact, when I got back here, when I first retired, until COVID hit, I had already put some plans to bring a medical professor and a person who was involved in that arts and medicine in the college there at Penn State. They were coming down here for a visit with Jill, and then COVID hit and all that fell apart. But anyway, so that is a very important, those are very important relationships that, and again, that was going on a long time ago, but it's now a nationally recognized program.
Yes.
And those are the kinds of things that we need to do in the arts. And again, people say, well, it's not what I was trained to do. I was trained to sing opera. Well, that's okay. We need to find people. It's a both and, we can't
Right.
too much time arguing either or. And let's find that was one of my mantras my executive team would tell you. They would begin to say back to me, let's find the both and. Let's find the both and in this. Let's not come at this either or. Let's find the both and.
What were some of the you talked obviously during your career and the intellectual leaders you've worked with over the years have made, so many accomplishments, breakthroughs. You mentioned the new building, a cumulative process. Sometimes faculty can be a little irritable because they want change to happen quickly. It doesn't happen quickly, right? Especially not higher education. But if you wouldn't mind sharing, one or two crises that the arts faced that you had to deal with, and then maybe lessons out of those crises or challenges that you had to face.
Here, are you speaking about here at UF or more general?
It could be at UF or maybe Penn State too, or both and.
Well, I think it may not seem like crisis because it's kind of continuing and more chronic, is the funding for the arts. And I would say from my experience, it was difficult at Florida. And both the lack of institutional support, internal institutional support for the arts, and the lack of tradition and support for building a tradition and fundraising for the arts at Florida. And I think there has been a real breakthrough with that, with some of the faculty hiring that I think that may have started under Lucinda, or maybe it was when Anya came. I'm not real sure exactly when they got sufficient funds to begin some new hiring, which was, really a nice gift in the arts here. But I think that's something that the University of Florida has struggled with. And I don't know how much better that is now, but my sense is it's quite a bit better. It has to be somewhat better because of the hiring. So I think that's been relieved. It was, I think, when I was at a point of assessing whether I would continue to stay here or look for another possibility, it was that was a major driver for me. I was at a point where I thought, I probably haven't one more shot in my career, and if I want to be where I can make a difference, what might that look like? And that was that was something that was important for me, and I think has been an issue for the University of Florida. Now, as I said, I think it's much better now. It's much better now than it was. We also face the crisis that you alluded to very early on in this discussion about the jobs market. And I think as pressure increases nationally and at the state level, that a college education is about getting a job, that will continue to make it much more difficult for the arts. I serve on national boards that, we still talk about this a lot. It's an alumni research board, but it's hard. Now, we have a lot of data that show that if you're in the arts alumni are satisfied, they're happy. Many of them who are in the arts feel more satisfied in their jobs. They accept the kind of gig economy that they have to do. I have a niece she and her husband both, he's a drummer, she's a dancer. I kind of go, okay, but they're making it, they're they're in their mid-30s and early, he's turning 40 this year, you know, and they're doing it, you know. But I think that's hard. That's going to get harder. And it's finding ways to combat that. And that's part of the work of Stephen Tepper and some of the work that we've done with doing surveys that we continue to do in SNAP is a way to combat that. But boy, it's hard. So I think, and our, you know, Paul, I would have to say, I think that the struggle we have nationally now, where, for lack of a better way to say this, it seems like the propaganda war, we lost the propaganda war. And I don't know how I fear for the arts in the propaganda war and as it reaches into higher education.
Well, you mentioned earlier, Barbara, I'm looking at the messages that you were sending to the university community in 2005. And what really struck me was the interdisciplinarity of your message, but also the internationalism. And you were really illuminating or kind of uplifting the work that students and faculty in the arts are doing and bringing people together from different cultures, different countries. And that may be the aspect of the propaganda war that we've lost. I mean, I think that I was reading a piece about, you know, Davos and the World Economic Forum, and a sense that that time of globalization may be past now. And we're kind of, it seems that there's a retreat back to a kind of nationalism where the arts doesn't thrive as well, it seems. I mean, what's your assessment?
Well, I think I think that's can be very true. I mean, there's an article, the latest issue of The Atlantic has the lead article is about aloneness and our antisocial culture. And I just heard on a report on NPR. I think the New York Times picked something up about that, and NPR today was having a discussion about people being lonely. All right. Well, you know, and part of that we see in our audiences. They were not reflecting on the arts at all. I mean, they were not.
Yeah.
Right. But an example they used was of a movie theater. You know, I mean, going to the movies was a communal experience. You go to the movies now, and there are 6 people in a movie theater that'll seat, you know, maybe 150.
Right.
The only time I've been in a full movie theater in the last 3 years has been when the weekend that Oppenheimer came out. And the Barbie thing, you know, and I went to see Oppenheimer. It was for the first time I've seen a full theater, and I don't know when, you know, but so I think that what's, you know, let's face it, we now have people, we are being led by people in this country now who want to be isolationists. They want to withdraw from world organizations that we've seen have been a benefit not just to us but to other countries, and our generosity in being benefit other countries. But now we're seeing that on the individual level too. And the NPR statement, and this is true. I mean, the article in the Atlantic mentions this. Loneliness is a serious health problem as tobacco is. Now, I'm not a doctor. I haven't thoroughly researched that statement, but it was on NPR and it was at the Atlantic, which is pretty good, pretty decent sources, you know. But they were saying that it really is, and you know, they were obviously citing other sources outside themselves, but that it's not just oh, I'm lonely. It's like, this is a serious problem. Well, so increasing, I mean, those are the things that arts can help, but if we are an antisocial, you know, if we're all pulling in ourselves and we're just doing it on watching our screens or watching our movies on TV at home, well, we're
right. Well, you know, and my fear, Barbara, too, is that, I mean, we're talking about external forces more or less, most of which is outside of, your control and my control. My fear, though, is that even within our respective bailiwicks, in higher education, in universities and colleges, that we've taken some steps backwards as well, in terms of our public mission. I mean, we talk about this, Cornell is in a unique situation because, we are a private institution, but we're also the land grant college, for the state of New York.
Right.
I'm in a public school, the ILR school, and we're really trying to, in many ways, recapture this connection between the school and the region, the community. We're in a rural community. Ithaca is a town of 30,000 people surrounded by farms. And so what can we do, and specifically what can the arts do? This, hopefully this isn't putting everything on your back or your shoulders, but what can the arts do to kind of recapture a sense of connectivity, of kind of, I don't want to say globalization, that's too vague, but you mentioned earlier, for example, like Shakespeare. I mean, there are other examples perhaps, but Shakespeare has become, you can see Shakespeare being performed on every continent now in different languages and different modalities. So is there a way for arts to play a role in reconnecting people, I guess? Sorry for that long-winded thing.
I think one of the things, so, one of the things to think about is how do we get earlier in the pipeline? So, and how do we take the arts to people? So let me go two different directions here. So one of the things I think is we think about how do we acquaint, again, students in rural communities, and many of our big research universities still, are in rural settings. University of Florida, Penn State, Cornell, but what can we do to get some of that in some of the stuff that we do in the public schools? And again, it's building relationships. It's a faculty understanding that this is a valuable enterprise, so that, I think to some extent, Paul, there needs to be a little bit of a shift in what we value in higher education. We bank so much on the tenure process in research and writing articles for journal 200 people might read. You know what I'm saying? Instead of saying, how do we value taking what we do into the grade school context and getting people excited about it? One of the things I have done for 20 years now or longer, I go in and I read to third graders. I haven't done it so much since COVID, but prior to that, I would connect with, usually through relationships we would have, and I would connect, and I go in and I read to third graders. Because, and I started actually here in Florida. A friend of mine was moved into the third grade because that's when a major test is taken that determines the grades in the school. Okay. And she was moved in it, it was a school here that a high percentage of minority students. And so that's where she was teaching. And I went in and I read, and they pulled 4 classes of third graders together that I read to every Monday morning, to get these kids excited. And then they would write stories, and so the idea was, without telling anybody, we were getting them excited about reading to get ready for a test. But it's okay. It's okay to do that in my frame of mind. It's okay. That's a good thing to do. It's a good use of my talent and my ability. And it's a good way to send the message about the arts. So what are those ways that we can get further down in the pipeline? Because that's truly an issue. Because we're seeing it now. We have raised a couple of generations of students who don't value education, who don't value understanding what the human experience is about, what the humanities about, who don't, they don't value that because they've had precious little way to get access to it. Okay.
Right.
And the other thing, and now I've kind of, that bird flew through my head. What was the other thing I said? Because there was another tact I was going with this.
Yeah, you had two, oh yeah.
The interdisciplinary, what then are the ways, what in fact are the ways that we can build these? How are we building connections? How are we connecting ourselves, in other ways? And so that we somehow find that value. So I think I have lost that second one. Trying to think.
Well,
I had examples of both, and now I'm not coming up with a good example of the second.
well, the interdisciplinary, you talked, and I, Lucinda mentioned this too. She talked about collaborations with engineering. When Phillips came up, you mentioned earlier Cami Abernathy, some really creative collaborations between, disciplines and units, which can be very difficult because we're trained within a certain discourse. And then public engagement, absolutely critical. Working with teachers, working with children. I know growing up, I grew up in a shipyard town, and so we didn't have. I mean, I sang in church choir, but we certainly didn't have an opportunity to go to theater that I can even think of. We had 2 movie theaters, but we didn't have the Starlight. Too small of a town, but yeah. So it just seems like you mentioned earlier something which is so very important, where 2 generations of students have been. I mean, I see it as the students raised without, and this is going to be very discipline oriented, but students who are in my classes who say, I've never finished a book. I've never read an entire book. And so they'll come to me and they'll look at my syllabus and they'll say, do you really expect us to read the entire book? And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, and then they're having problems because they're not raised. It's more than expectations. I think it's just something that there's a love of learning that I think has been almost like squeezed out of people in some ways. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I remember, I used to use my name as Asher Lev for some of my classes because it was a fun way for them to get into art and a coming of age story, and I would get the same thing. Now that's been over 20 years ago. So I would get kickback about reading a novel in an art class.
Right.
Actually, now that you mention that, I just read an article about that. I think it might have been in the Chronicle about that very thing, about students now don't read. I mean, they've never read a book. They just have read books. I can remember, and again, this has been close to 20 years ago, but I used to require students to read about the arts in a newspaper. Come in with a paper, and they were like, and of course now you can't hardly find a printed paper, but
Right.
you're a small town locally, as we know from the Gainesville Sun, right?
Yeah. A lot of papers have discontinued their. Well, here's maybe you can I know you sympathize with this, but I've taught, when I teach African American and Latino histories, poetry and theater are actually very important. And so, for example, in my course I'm teaching now, we'll be reading August Wilson's The Piano Lesson.
Yeah.
The play, and then the students will see the film. It's going to help that it has Samuel Jackson and they know who, and everything. But for years I've used plays. And about 10 years ago, though, I started running into students who said, you got to help me read this because I've never read a play, where you have the names and the script or, and the settings and the staging and everything like that. And it was so foreign to them. And it was really astounding to me because I was like, you've never read a play, you're a junior or a senior in college, and you've never read a play. So, I don't want to sound condescending, but it seems like, again, that's another example of students who are kind of missing that kind of, even I remember you were talking about these great performances or actors at an earlier era, and I was thinking about, Edward Albee, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and watching the film, which was brilliantly done and brilliantly acted and performed, of course, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, et cetera, et cetera. But then I didn't really understand that story until I could read the script or read the play. And then suddenly I'm like, whoa, this is really, this is something quite profound. And I think that's something that that younger folks are just not being.
Yeah, and see, that's a good example of how do you find the time, because then suddenly you're eating into quote unquote class time. But how do you find the time? Because probably what makes a difference there is to do that out loud, do some of it out loud.
Yeah.
And again, contact a theater colleague and say, could you help me do some of this? Even if you could only read a portion of it or part of it in class, but get those students up there, get them read it.
Let them read it. Yeah.
Let them read it, and give them a little thing and let them fly. Those are I do think we have to just get so much more inventive and figure out what we do, because it is hard, but we can't throw up our hands.
Yeah.
We cannot do that. And that's true, I think, as we've talked about in the arts, like I started going, gosh, I'm glad I'm retired. But on the other hand, I'm still in there pitching. And mentoring, and I still want to help. The whole thing, my colleague Mark and I, who started the Athens Leadership Institute, and then we did it for years for our theater group, and then we've been doing it for the International Council for Fine Arts Teams. And that's kind of been our mark in terms of leadership over the years. But it was that whole thing was started back in 2000, and discussions started about it for 3 or 4 years before we finally did it. We need advocates in the administrative circles. We can't sit on our thumbs and treat administration like it's dirty, like it's the other side. It's like, no, we got to get in there and muck it up if we're going to raise the perspective on our disciplines. We got to have more humanists, and we got to have more artists at the table.
Yeah. And
that's one reason we started this whole leadership trend, that it's not something to be afraid of. It's another way you can make a difference. I remember years ago when I first was, this is when I was at Seattle Pacific and I was a dean, and they came to me and asked me to take over a provost position. And I said, I wasn't ready to do that. I said, I'm not. And I remember one of my colleagues came to me and said, he said, we want you to do this. And I said, I'm not comfortable doing this. And I said, I'm not ready to do this. I don't want to do it. The truth of the matter, all I ever really wanted to do was teach. And I said, and I'm being a dean right now, but and I was still teaching, I always tried to manage to teach as a dean. And he said, but if you're teaching, it's just at a different level. He said, it's just like with all of us, you teach us, but it's a different level. I said, yeah, but the problem is at that point, the exams are all public and I'm the one taking them.
Right.
But we can't be afraid to keep doing that. We can't, and that's why we need more humanists, we need more artists to be at the administrative table.
Yeah. Well, Barbara, I've taken up a lot of your time, almost 90 minutes, and I want to be cognizant of that, and again, just very grateful and thankful.
I used to say I have a Jackson Pollock mind.
Okay. But and then also, as we're wrapping up, I'm sure Deborah has shared this with you also. We can do a follow-up a bit down the road. As you listen to this and think and have more time to think, it often is the case that we call you're a narrator now. we find that our narrators often will have kind of follow-up thoughts or things to share, and you can always do that. So that will be added to the interview. But as we're closing it down now, are there any kind of closing, concluding thoughts that you have about your career, about the arts, about higher education, about how to solve the world's problems, et cetera, et cetera?
Right. Oh my, yeah. Greater minds clearly are not doing very well with that, so. Oh, no, I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. This has really been quite pleasant, and as I said, I hope useful and helpful. And I would make the offer back the other way as well. If there's something that comes out of this that prompts you to want to know more, you're welcome to send an email that I can respond to, or I'm welcome to get on Zoom. I'm pretty flexible with my time. Every day is Saturday now.
All right, I love that. Every day is Saturday. That's a great motto. Well, cool, Barbara. Thank you so much again.